اولا انا حابب اشكر كل الناس اللي حضرت الويبينار معانا النهارده، وبتمنى يا رب إن موضوع الويبينار يبقى مفيد بالنسبه لنا كلنا ان شاء الله. في البدايه احب اعرف بنفسي. انا اسمي احمد خميس، شانل اكونت مانجر في مجال الاي تي. بشتغل بقالي حوالي 8 سنين ما بين مايكروسوفت كسوفت وير، وما بين سايبر سكيورتي برودكت مانجر لاكثر من فيندور في السايبر سكيورتي. كنت برضو اشتغلت فتره كبيره في الاند بوينت سكيورتي في كذا فيندور خاص بالاند بوينت، خاص بالاي دي ار. احنا شركه جيتلوك، فوكس في سايبر سكيورتي ديستريبيوتور، واحنا الوكيل الوحيد المعتمد لشركه ووتش جارد في مصر. يعني عندنا خبره كبيره، عندنا ستاف تكنيكال وبري سيلز، وبنقدر نقدم سبورت لكل الكاستمرز والبارتنرز في مصر. ووتش جارد هو الفندور المعروف طبعا على مدار 30 سنه من السايبر سيكيورتي اندستري. في الحقيقه ووتش جارد هي عندها بورتفوليو كبير جدا من السكيورتي برودكتس، سواء النتورك سكيورتي اللي هي النكست جنريشن فاير وول، او الجزء بتاع الوايرلس سكيورتي. وده يعني احنا كنا اتكلمنا عليه في ويبينارز قبل كده. هو موضوع يونيك جدا في ووتش جارد. وعرفنا ازاي ان ووتش جارد اكسس بوينت هي الاكسس بوينت الوحيده اللي بتقدر تعمل اوتو ديتكشن وبريفنشن لكل السكس نون كاتيجوريز من الوايرلس اتاكس. وده علشان هم عندهم الويبس او الوايرلس انتروجن بريفنشن سيستم، وده عندهم كمان بيقدر ان هو يسكيور كل الوايرلس اكسس بوينت اللي في الرينج بتاع الوايرلس بتاع الاكسس بوينت الموجود. ووتش جارد مش بس كمان بيقدر يسكيور نفسه او يسكيور الانفايرمنت بتاعته، او يسكيور الانفايرمنت اللي فيها ثيرد بارتي اكسس بوينت، سواء بقى كان سيسكو، اروبا، سيسكو ميراكي، اي اذر ثيرد بارتي اكسس بوينت. يعني كمان ووتش جارد عندها دي ان اس سكيورتي، وده بيبقى على السكيل بتاع النتورك، بيسموه دي ان اس ووتش، او على السكيل بتاع الاند بوينتس، وده بيسموه دي ان اس ووتش جو. وده يعتبر من برودكتس الاند بوينت في ووتش جارد. مهم جدا استخدامه للريموت يوزر عشان يقدر يأمنهم من الفاشنج. كمان ووتش جارد عندها برودكت اسمه بوث بوينت، هو المالتي فاكتور اوثنتيكيشن برودكت. اوكي. وده طبعا برودكت مهم جدا في وقت بقى ان بقى في باسورد كومبرومايز. والموضوع دلوقتي مهم جدا ان انت يبقى عندك او تي بي بيجي لك على الباسورد على الموبايل او خلال موبايل ابلكيشن، علشان تقدر تاكسس على السيرفيسز بتاعتك. فووتش جارد عامله سولوشن بيقدر يجمع كل الباسوردز بتاعتك في بلاتفورم واحده، وتقدر تديها او تي بي من موبايل ابلكيشن او اس ام اس او باركود او كذا حاجه، يعني دي كذا طريقه. وده كمان يقدر يسكيور السيرفرز بقى بتاعتك والاكسس بتاع البي سيز او اللابتوبس لليوزرز كلهم في الشركه. يعني طبعا انا مش عايز اطول عليكم في موضوع البورتفوليو. ووتش جارد الحقيقه عندها بورتفوليو كبير جدا، خصوصا في النتورك سكيورتي. احنا نعتبر ما اتكلمناش عنها خالص، انا مريت عليها كده بسرعه، قلت هم عندهم نتورك سكيورتي بس هم عندهم الحقيقه يعني باندلز غنيه جدا في الفاير وولز. وكمان ووتش جارد اخر 3 ريبورت من ان اس اس لاب هم كانوا ريكومندد من ان اس اس لاب بنو اوبزرفد ديفيجنز. اخر برودكت بقى هنتكلم عنه هو الاند بوينت سكيورتي او الادفانسد اند بوينت سكيورتي في واتش جارد، اللي هو في الحقيقه بقى باندا سكيورتي، اللي احنا يعني بنرحب بيهم النهارده معانا. وهو ده بعد ما حصل اكوزيشن من باندا سكيورتي، من شركه واتش جارد على باندا سكيورتي، وبقت واتش جارد تقدر تقدم كل البورتفوليو بتاع باندا، اللي هو عباره عن الاند بوينت بروتكشن والاند بوينت بروتكشن بلس والادفانسد والادابتيف ديفense 360، اللي هو الاند بوينت والاي دي او، بلس ان هم عندهم باتش مانجمنت وعندهم انكريبشن، عندهم ادفانسد ريبورتنج تولز. ده بيقدر يعني انتجريت مع الادابتيف ديفense 360، ويقدر يطلع ريبورتات مهمه جدا، ويطلع مابينج لكل حاجه بيعملها الاتاك جوه الانفايرمنت. طبعا انا مش هتكلم في الموضوع ده يعني كتير، لان احنا اوريدي عندنا ديمو على الادابتيف ديفense 360 في اخر الويبينار. ودلوقتي بقى يعني ننقل الكلمه السبيكر بتاعنا من واتش جارد، هو مستر جيرمي. هو الافريكا سي تي او، سوري سي اي او اوف واتش في باندا افريكا. مستر جيرمي عنده خبره حوالي اكثر من 20 سنه مع باندا سكيورتي في الاي تي اندستري عموما. هو اللي هي introduce Panda security as a watchdog brand. Now we can start with our today's speaker, Mr. Jeremy. Hello, Mr. Jeremy.
Yes,
very
greetings.
Excited you today.
And thank you for the introduction. It's appreciated.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Surely, yes. Please confirm that you can see the slides.
Yes.
Yes.
Very good. Very good.
Yes.
Right. All right. So our starting point today is really to understand in the first place how the threat landscape has changed, and has changed dramatically in terms of security generally, but particularly insofar as how our technology on the endpoint, from an endpoint security perspective, has to change. And we're tracking Panda's journey, if you will, in terms of the development of technology over 30 years. So we're looking at a timeline here where you can see at the bottom how over a period of time we've been dealing with file-based threats, and nowadays, in addition to mitigating file-based threats, we also have to address fileless attacks and malwareless attacks. What you can see with the circles represented there is the development of Panda technologies to address the whole range of threats and types of malware and attack that have to be answered to from an endpoint perspective. What you'll see if we look at in the middle of our slide here is how there is a significant change in terms of the level of technology that we deliver in 2015. And that is when we launch a whole new protection model, which in generic terms, industry-wise, is referred to as EDR, endpoint detection and response. So classically, your more traditional protection antivirus is referred to as endpoint protection, EPP, and that is really what you see represented in that first block there those technologies that are designed to address file-based threats, and they typically do so using signature files, using blacklisting-based techniques. And of course, we still do that deliver that protection today. But what we are really going to focus on today for you is the concept of advanced security on the endpoint that goes beyond the limitations of traditional antivirus. And what you'll see, interestingly, is if we look at how we referenced in the middle of the slide, this concept of 100% attestation, we also use the term zero trust application service. And here's something for you to perhaps think about, and hopefully we will unpack the answer for you. But notice how one of the capabilities that we deliver is the mitigation, defense against unknown malware. So you may ask, how can we possibly stop unknown malware? And that's what we will be unpacking very, very shortly. And then last word around this particular slide is just to say that the technologies you see here, they are delivered with a cloud-hosted, cloud-managed architecture with a single agent and a single console. And that represents significant value for us in terms of reducing complexity and providing a technology which is light in terms of overhead and is very optimized performance-wise. So another sort of simpler way of thinking about the different threats that we have to address is, if we look at the 4 blocks there, we have to defend against malware, which can be executable files and fileless threats. We have to defend against exploits. So this is often making use of vulnerabilities in operating systems and in third-party software. And it's why it is so critical and so important to have effective patch management policies in place and programs. Then the 2 threat types that we speak to at the bottom are really difficult to deal with. It's about how can we defend against insider attacks in terms of the organization. And that can be, for example, disgruntled employees, or it could be abuses by IT people in terms of their work with technology being abused and breaking confidentiality. And then from beyond the firewall, hacking attacks. And these 2 represent a particular challenge for us in the sense that they, in many cases, attacks will not use any identifiable malicious code. Now, if we look at what is happening in this year today, we've seen a major challenge from a security perspective where our attack surface has increased and organizations have become far more vulnerable to attack. And this, of course, has to do with the COVID pandemic and this worldwide exercise in terms of people working from home. And we've seen, I think, maybe for a long time yet, the world change in terms of how we work. So no longer do we have everybody coming to a nicely IT secured campus, everybody working behind a firewall. Is that increasingly we're dealing with a distributed world, and one that is quite dynamic. So we will be in the office one day, we'll be working from home the next, and maybe we'll be traveling next week somewhere. All right. So we have to think about how can we secure endpoints that are not on the domain and that in many cases are mobile and roaming. And if we look at the nature of malware, so what we're seeing is there is increasing sophistication in the nature and type of attacks. And a lot of this is driven, of course, by economic model, by ransomware as a service. So one of the challenges is that it's become quite easy for a threat actor to obtain the necessary tools to conduct an attack, even if they don't necessarily have the ability to create those tools themselves. In other words, there's a market for such technologies. And what we're seeing is that the situation is taken advantage of, that threat actors, they know that organizations are more vulnerable. And if we consider for many organizations, what is our defense on the endpoint? And we'll find that for many companies, they haven't moved to an advanced technology. They're using a traditional antivirus. And the problem with that is that because it is premised on blacklisting principles, is that the greater majority of processes and executables on the endpoint are allowed to run without any validation. So from a risk perspective, from an organizational risk perspective, we have processes that are allowed to run that are unknown. And we'll see in time how we can address that with Panda's advanced security model. And so we've spoken about how the industry, from a security perspective, tends to work with pattern-based protection and is looking to detect malware. And we have to go beyond that because these existing models are no longer fully effective. They're no longer sufficient to address the sophisticated forms of malware and the range of attack types that we're dealing with on the endpoint today. And this really comes through and is very obvious and manifest given the challenge of ransomware attacks. And what we're seeing is those are becoming highly targeted and they're very economically driven and fueled. Here are some quite interesting examples. And of course, there have been a number of very recent high-profile ransomware attacks. There was the Colonial Pipeline on the east coast of America that paralyzed delivery of fuel. And then on Friday, the Irish Health Service was badly hit, and that has a major disruptive effect on the ability to deliver healthcare. So it's very apparent that ransomware is a significant issue that we need effective technology to address. It can affect everybody, the small company, the large company, and it is sufficiently serious that it can take an organization out of business, as you see represented there with Travelex, for example. And then what we're also seeing is supply chain type attacks that happen over time and that affect multiple entities. A big one from the end of last year was the SolarWinds attack, and we're still seeing the repercussions of that this year, affecting large numbers of big companies and also various cybersecurity vendors. I think the interesting thing, though, is that what we are now doing is increasingly getting closer to what is happening on networks and endpoints in telemetry terms, so that we are better able to identify those attacks and to do root cause analysis in a way that we haven't been able to do before. So from a Panda vendor perspective, we have to address this world that we're living in with these serious attacks and threats. We have these new technologies, and they get delivered in the products that you see referenced there: Adaptive Defense and Adaptive Defense 360. They're effectively a common offering, and there's a very sort of simple distinction. Adaptive Defense is positioned as a technology which will run as an advanced EDR offering alongside your existing third-party antivirus. And then Adaptive Defense 360 is a full displacement offering. So it does everything that your third-party AV, whatever brand that might be, does today, and then delivers a whole set of protection technologies that are highly advanced. And we can unpack those here with this model. So, and just to explain again that with layer 1, that is your traditional sort of EPP type technology. And we still need that. We need that to address your commoditized attacks. And that's incorporated in AD360. And from an adaptive defense perspective, our protection layers kick in from layer 2 to 5, such that if for various reasons you may choose, often for a time, just to keep your AV in place, that can do your layer 1 protection. What we find is that in most cases, organizations would prefer to move straight away to AD360. It gives us a single console, a single agent, and it delivers a comprehensive stack of EPP and EDR technologies. What you'll pick up from each of these layers that they are highly telemetry driven, and we'll go into some detail about that and how we use the telemetry. But what we're now able to do is, by monitoring process on endpoints, is that it allows us to go beyond purely detecting malware, and we can start understanding context. We can identify anomalous behavior on the endpoint, which gives us a view of what happens in terms of a malwareless attack. We're going to be focusing particularly on layer 4, the Zero Trust Application Service, because it is a significant differentiator in terms of Panda's technology, and it is a concept and a solution that is highly effective in addressing ransomware attacks and defending you from ransomware and stopping it from being able to run. And it works like this. So we've spoken about telemetry. So we actually monitor when your Panda agent's installed, and we are monitoring process on the endpoint, some 4,000 fields worth of information. Everything that's happening in terms of software operation and file access and the access of applications and communications, so inbound and outbound, and the associated protocols. And then what we do by monitoring process and execution, we then classify the process so that we deliver a very simple binary. So a process is identified as malware or as goodware. We can compare this model with the traditional EPP model and something that applies to many products that tend to be more detection orientated. So they're looking for malware. They're not positively validating goodware. And you can see, just to remind ourselves of the challenge of running that type of tech, is that so much of what is happening on the endpoint that is processing is unknown to us. And what is unknown represents risk, as opposed to validating every process and classifying it. Okay, this is why we call it a zero trust application service. What we also do is we eliminate the flagging of suspicious items. This creates a major challenge. There becomes alert fatigue, or there is nobody to be able to investigate suspicious items. And so what happens is that maybe a technology has identified a malicious process as suspicious, but because it isn't able to validate it 100%, it flags it such that it's still allowed to run because nobody is around to intervene to work on that flagging. So we avoid that by ensuring that we eliminate the flagging of suspicious items. And this is how we do it. And of course, we're seeing now how we're able to defend against unknown malware. So we'll walk through the steps involved in classification. This is what we're representing here. So you'll see in terms of step one, this is very close to what an antivirus does. The difference, though, is that we go further than antivirus because we profile behavior of malicious executables as we do goodware as well. So in other words, we understand exactly how an application behaves. And that helps us both in identifying malware at a deeper level than just working, say, with things like hashes, but also in terms of step two, where we're effectively working on a whitelisting basis, is we understand, for example, how Microsoft Word should work. So it's profiled. And then you'll see that we have a step three, and the combined step one, step two, step three accounts for almost 100% of classification. It happens automatically. Finally, though, to eliminate suspicious flagging, any item that our automated process isn't able to classify is manually classified by Panda Labs. And that's how we deliver as a service this binary. And we're able to run the technology operationally in different modes. And this gives us control to ensure that we don't end up with a denial of service situation with legitimate applications. And what it does is, as we go through these various modes with lockdown, this is uncompromising. So very simply, we will not allow any unknown application to run until it's been validated as goodware. So you can see in practical terms how this concept of working with a trust model. So we validate to the extent that we only allow trusted applications to run. Now, the other differentiated service, aside from the zero trust attestation service, is our threat hunting and investigation service. So we've spoken about how we use telemetry, and then of course we have the machine learning to deliver this automatic classification. And then that same telemetry we can use to identify hacking attacks. And we do this with a model that involves being proactive in developing hypotheses, developing a scenario which can then be tested against our event data lake. So since 2015, we have all the data in terms of behavior, and we're able to mine that and identify attack types. And those can be tested. And as we do so, and as a previously hidden attack method is then made apparent to us, we can bring in a new detection alert for that new previously unknown attack type. So coming back to this matter of suspicious flagging, that most other products they flag items as suspicious. So major benefit that we deliver in terms of not delegating the security decision to the customer. So what we can do is to summarize the positioning of Adaptive Defense and Adaptive Defense 360 as it's a mature solution. We've been delivering EDR technologies for over 5 years. It's cloud hosted, cloud managed, and it's a technology that delivers significant visibility because of our effective gathering of telemetry on the endpoint. And then we can bring that telemetry into a back-end model that involves machine learning and sophisticated techniques from a data science and security analytics perspective. And then, of course, as we've mentioned, no suspicious items, no items under investigation. So we've worked through the core protection proposition for Panda. Now you may ask, so how else can you help me? What other capabilities do you deliver out of the platform? So we will go on to speak to that. And what we'll do is we'll take a break for a moment from the protection technology and introduce Panda Systems Management. We're dealing here with a different product to our protection family, but one that is designed on the same principles of being cloud hosted, cloud managed with a single agent install. But this is about remote monitoring and management. And it's a solution that is designed to bring together so many tasks that are often done with multiple tools. So maybe some Spiceworks for monitoring, TeamViewer for remote access, some other product for software asset management. And with systems management, we are able to deliver all of the various types of task and monitoring and management function with one product. So we can do software deployment, we can do inventory reporting, we can deliver remote access, all with single agent, single console. And this is a very strong companion technology to our protection offerings. So back to the protection family, to adaptive defense and its Ether console and how we can extend capabilities. So we have a set of optional modules. We have the advanced reporting tool, and that gives us the ability to query, to alert on all of the telemetry that is used in the security model. And it goes beyond just the security use case. We can use it from a software asset management perspective because I now have a view of all of my running applications. And we can use it in terms of, say, data loss detection, because I can monitor software operation. I can monitor OneDrive as a shared file service. So lots of capabilities here in terms of the advanced reporting tool. And shortly, Matthew will give you a demonstration, a quick view of what the advanced reporting tool's about. Then within our Ether-based console, we can add in as an option, and it plugs in seamlessly, full encryption. This is a management capability for BitLocker, or in the case of Mac, for File Vault. And this allows us to encrypt and decrypt drives. It audits that process, and it gives us recovery keys. And for those of you that are having to address compliance requirements, GDPR, for example, where there is an expectation that drives are encrypted, this really does assist in being able to manage encryption sustainably when, in many cases, your endpoints are remote, and we need to be able to fully manage encryption from our console. Then we have patch management. So this is our Ether-based patch management. It constitutes seamlessly within the console, and it delivers the full discovery and audit, not just of Microsoft patches, but some 300 third-party vendors. And it then goes on to be able to give us the ability, it will pull in the patches from the vendors, and it allows us to deploy very quickly and easily to remote endpoints. All right, so we've covered quite a bit of ground. We've got our base protection proposition, our advanced security model. We've got the available modules. So what we'll do now is let's position them in terms of the product line, the products that you would actually subscribe for and license. So we still have our EPP technology. So we have a sort of a lower cost entry point, Panda Endpoint Protection. And then Endpoint Protection Plus, which brings in web filtering. Adaptive Defense, we've spoken about, which is our EDR technology to run alongside a third-party antivirus. And then AD360, which is the fully integrated EPP and EDR stack. It effectively combines the feature set of Endpoint Protection Plus and Adaptive Defense all in one orderable SKU. And then, having chosen our base product, we can extend capability with the range of optional modules. All of the base products can have added to them the full encryption module or Panda Patch Management. And then our EDR technologies we can plug in the advanced reporting tool dashboard, or if we are running a SIEM platform such as a Splunk, an IBM QRadar, we can bring in the Panda endpoint telemetry into that SIEM via our SIEM feeder module in the context of a SOC. And then we have, in parallel with our protection technology, Panda Systems Management, which is our RMM product. And then commercially, there is a discount if you effectively combine your Endpoint Protection Plus with Systems Management. That product is called Fusion, or combine AD360 with Systems Management, which is Fusion 360. I'll now hand over to my colleague, Matthew Stevens, who's going to give you a live view of the technology and demonstrate it via the console. And I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jeremy, for this valuable information. يعني أنا حابب بس أعمل ريكاب كده عن الكلام اللي مستر جيرمي كان بيتكلم عنه. هو يعني اتكلم عن باندا هيستوري وعن الانوفيشن اللي حصل في باندا خلال 30 سنة، وازاي قدرت باندا تقدم لنا كلاود بيزد سولوشن بيقدر يعمل بروتكشن على كل انواع الزيرو داي اتاكس بالاي بي تي. اتكلم عن التريت لاندسكيب وعن اخطر السايبر اتاكس اللي حصلت مؤخرا واهميه اللاير بروتكشن تو ميتيجيت ذيس اتاكس. كمان اتكلم عن الزيرو تراست ابلكيشن سيرفيس اللي باندا بتقدمها، وازاي باندا هو الفندر الوحيد اللي بيقدر يعمل 100% O2 كلاسيفيكيشن لكل الابلكيشنز والسيرفيسز بزيرو تراست كونسبت. واخيرا اتكلم عن مزايا الادابتيف ديفense اللي مستر ماثيو هيعمل لنا عليه الديمو دلوقتي، وعن وجود الاي دي ار والماشين ليرنينج، واتكلم عن يعني كل الاوبشنال ميدياز. Hi Matthew, I'm so happy to have you today.
Thank you very much. Thank you everybody for attending today's webinar session. The screen sharing should be up already, so you should see a live example of a demo console for Panda's Adaptive Defense 360 technology. Now, this is the same web console that we use for managing all of our protection products. So everything from our entry-level antivirus all the way through to our flagship Adaptive Defense product will be managed in a similar way through the same console. Now, in the console, we have the ability to integrate the additional modules that Jeremy was talking about. So things like the web filtering capabilities, if you want to have a look what the web usage looks like within an organization, the patch management capabilities, and this is fantastic because this is a very simple and easy to use patching solution. And if we go through these very quickly, you can see if I want to patch devices, all I need to do is select the patch, click on install, and off it goes. We also have our full encryption module, which integrates seamlessly with this console, which allows you to track the encryption status of all the devices on your network, and of course, enforce encryption policies. Now, what I really wanted to highlight is one of the main differences between a traditional antivirus product and an EDR solution. So if we have a look here, we're on the status page for our EDR product. We can see, yes, there's some malware detections, which is great. But what you'll probably be familiar with is the kind of detection log that you see in a traditional endpoint protection product. And the log has some information, right? It's got the device, the type of threat that was detected and the time when that threat actually went through. But this isn't that much information. This is basically the bare minimum, which doesn't give you a lot of context to what you're actually detecting. However, if we compare that to what you get out of an EDR product, so if I select the EDR module or the advanced protection and I select a malware that has been run, you can see that we've artificially allowed this malware to execute. And the reason we've done this is so that we can get some more information about the threat. In this case, we have the same information, such as which device at which path is being targeted. And then we also have a little bit more in-depth information about the threat itself, including links to third-party resources if you want to continue researching the malware. What's very interesting about the EDR product is that we're also able to track the infection vector that was used. So if a user account was compromised, we can tell you exactly what user account was used and from which device that user account was used. So you know the source of the infection. We can also track the prevalence of the infection on your network at the bottom here. So you can see we've got a list of other machines that are running similar malware. And this is quite useful to see because you'll often see if you have, say, a spam campaign with a malicious attachment, you will find the machines that have all run that attachment listed below here. Now that's fine. That's a bit more information, but we can go a little bit deeper. And in this case, we're going to have a look at our activity section. And here we will have a detailed log of the activity that the malware has taken. So for example, registry modifications made, connections to remote IP addresses, and I guess most importantly, any child processes spawned as a result of the virus executing. And we have lots of telemetry here. So this telemetry is available for the full life cycle of the threat. And if we want to visualize that life cycle, we can actually select the activity graph, and the activity graph will allow us to effectively view over a timeline the nature of the threat. So if I drag the timeline back here quickly, and this is 20 minutes. So this is what a virus can do to the machine, in only a 20-minute window. And we can see the threat is installing a lot of third-party tools, more and more third-party tools. So this is the kind of threat that uses affiliate networks in order to generate revenue. Basically, it's installing stuff on your computer and it generates money that way. So as you can see, an EDR product gives you a lot more insight and a lot more visibility in terms of what's happening in a malicious context on your network. So very useful to be able to get some context around that. Now, just so that you understand how the product comes together, our solution is agent-based, which means that you install an agent locally on your machines, and you can install that agent for a variety of different operating systems. They're all licensed together, so it's one license per device, and you can download for Windows, Mac, Linux, or Android devices. It's very simple. You select the operating system that you'd like to install to, and you can just download the installer from the console. There is no additional infrastructure required on the client network. It's basically just the agent on the endpoint and the cloud console to manage that deployment. This means that we offer the same protection capability regardless of where the user is. So if this is a user working in the office, or if it's a user that's working from home, say during lockdown or with COVID restrictions, you have the same protection capability of that device regardless of where the machine is actually located. Very easy to use, and actually implement product. Right, now the last module that I really wanted to cover is our advanced reporting tool, and this is also accessible through the console. However, it actually links through to a portal hosted by a company called Devo.com. Now, Devo provides the analytics engine, and we effectively provide the telemetry. And this is telemetry that we've gathered from our threat hunting and investigation service. Now, we will do, of course, threat hunting on our side, but by giving the client or you access to the telemetry, you can use that data for various other purposes. So you'll see what I've opened here is an example of some of the outputs generated by the telemetry, and we can do things like track the amount of malware across the various days, who's got more detections, who's got fewer detections, where your high-risk areas are. And we can also track activity based on various other factors. So if I wanted to see, for example, something like bandwidth consumption, I could go to a section that allows me to see how much bandwidth an individual application is using, and then analyze it that way. I will give this just a second to load. I don't know if it's taking long because I'm screen sharing. If it doesn't load in a moment, we'll go on and then just come back to it in the end. Okay, it's going to take a while to load, so we'll come back to it as soon as we're done. I want to talk a little bit about the telemetry itself, and the telemetry that we have, like I said, comes from our agents directly logged on the endpoints, and that has several advantages. The devices don't have to have proximity to a server that would actually capture or log those telemetry events, and it also means that we get direct insight into the event, so we can do our own correlation. So, for example, if we have a look at something like our socket table will display very detailed information about events that are taking place on a machine. So here we can see we have a machine name, we have the user account that's logged in. Oops, it's logged into the machine at the time, an application that's been run, and in this case, that application is TeamViewer. And then, of course, we have the properties of the TCP/IP connection that TeamViewer established. So we can see what protocol it used, port, and the remote IP address. So we can see if somebody used TeamViewer to connect to a remote host. And what's really nice is we can actually use this console to build our own queries and reports and generate our own outputs based on insights within the organization. Now, that's quite simple to do. I'll just do a very quick example here just before we end off the session. Let's just have a quick look at rendering out an example for us. So if we do some geolocation here, let's add a new column for geolocation. Here we go. We'll add a new column there, and we can actually do some post-processing here. So I'm looking for coordinates. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to return coordinates against the remote IP address field. We're going to add that as a new column. We're also going to do some filtering here. So there's some additional functions that we can use, and I'm going to choose to filter out all the private IP addresses. So I'm just going to look for all the public IP addresses, public IP version 4. There we go. Now we can group this data up to make this data a little bit more usable. And what we would choose to do in this particular case is look at a machine, look at the remote IP address the machine was connecting to, and then of course where in the world that that machine is based. And we'll group that data, which will make a much more manageable data set. So we can actually use this to build our own queries. I'm going to add a count function here, which is going to tell me how often these connections are being established. And if I now want to visualize this, I can actually do so quite easily using a graph diagram. So all I would need to do is drag the properties of the connections that I wanted to analyze, and that would allow me to geolocate quite effectively and also establish a usage pattern for my applications. We'll let that run. It'll probably take a moment, and you'll see it'll dance around and generate the traffic for me. There we go. Now, if I really wanted to, I can use this to establish patterns and trends. There are different ways that you can actually choose to represent or render this data. And because we were using a geolocation function, what's really interesting is that we're actually able to render this on a world map. So if I wanted to view where in the world this communication was going, we could actually view on a world map the location of those IP addresses. Very, very useful tool, very easy to do quick analytics of the data within your environment, and a very useful add-on to Adaptive Defense 360. So just to recap quickly, we've looked at our flagship product, Panda Adaptive Defense 360, and the comparison between the Advanced Protection module as well as the antivirus. We looked at all the add-on modules, so things like web filtering, patch management, and our encryption. And then we discussed how easy it is to deploy the agent into your environment, and then, of course, the advanced reporting tool. Cool. So thank you very much for attending. If there are any technical questions, we are happy to answer any questions on your side. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew, for your presentation and this impressive workshop. There is a question coming from one of our attendees. They are asking about what is the major differences between the endpoint protection and the EDR, and how Panda products doing it.
Oh, great. Okay, so the main difference between an endpoint protection product and an EDR solution is that endpoint protection products tend to be reactive. So a threat has to exist in the wild before the endpoint protection product can analyze and detect it. Whereas an EDR product is actually quite proactive. In other words, it's going to focus on protecting the workstation first, and only afterwards worry about classifying the threat and that kind of thing. So as Jeremy mentioned, we have our Zero Trust attestation service, which allows us to classify files on your network. And this is the service that we use to proactively protect your endpoints. So we're effectively providing an extra layer of protection on the workstation, and that layer is effectively a second opinion from Panda Labs as to the classification and safety of the file. And that's the major difference between it's a major difference between endpoint protection products and EDR solutions. Although you can in the EDR space find slightly different implementations for that. But the bottom line is that endpoint protection is very reactive, whereas EDR solutions are very proactive in their response to protecting machines. So I hope that answers the question. I see there is another question about, can any user uninstall Panda from the device? By default, no. So there is a built-in password that you need to enter when you uninstall, and that password will only be accessible to administrators of the web console. So when they try to uninstall Panda, they can they'll be prompted for that password, and they can only uninstall it if that password is there. The other things that we can do is we do have anti-tamper protections. So the user can't uninstall, but the user can also not stop the services or manipulate any of the settings. So we do have that capability as well. I think that was for Mustafa, yeah. Cool. Any other questions?
Yes, there is another question. Is the adaptive defense can integrate with other traditional endpoints without adaptive defense 360?
Okay, so that's a very good question, and yes, it can. So if a client is already running an existing endpoint protection technology, that's not a problem. You can just use Adaptive Defense as a standalone module that will run as a second layer of protection over and above that existing endpoint. So you might have a McAfee installation or a Kaspersky installation. You can run Adaptive Defense alongside that product. And if you wish to, at a later stage, you can upgrade to Adaptive Defense 360, which is a very common scenario for us. We do encounter that quite frequently. So yes, you can run Adaptive Defense alongside another antivirus.
Oh, perfect. And then what is the difference between the endpoint and the endpoint which already used by the Panda through Adaptive Defense 360? Is there any differences between both, or Panda using the same endpoint?
So the endpoint protection technology falls part of the Adaptive Defense 360 stack. So you're not getting any better signature-based protection through the Adaptive Defense 360 product. So it'll use the same endpoint protection that's included there. So if you are a client that just wants an antivirus product, no problem. We have our award-winning endpoint protection product which you can install, and it leverages our very powerful cloud-based collective intelligence engine to detect threats well, pretty much as quickly as possible. So we often talk about the 0-day gap, and that nowadays has actually been brought down to 0 hours. So it's a very effective endpoint protection technology, and that is included in Adaptive Defense 360. So if you're an endpoint protection client and you wanted to upgrade to Adaptive Defense 360, very easy to do. We can just flip a switch on our side, and that will allow you access to the advanced features included in Adaptive Defense 360. Okay, I see there is another question there around integration with a firewall appliance. We don't really have direct integration. However, we do have additional modules that you can use to feed data to those appliances. So if they're getting syslog formatted telemetry or something like that, we can actually forward the telemetry events similar to what we would get out of the advanced reporting tool, but we could forward that to a firewall, or what's more commonly actually is some sort of SIEM appliance. We could go and analyze that telemetry. Great. All right, I see there's another question. If you're using audit mode, that means that it'll only track malware and you'll be responsible for blocking. Kind of. So in audit mode, we don't use the blocking first approach. So we will analyze the file, we will classify the file, but we will only block the threat after the threat has been classified. You, as the user, however, you can step in at that stage. So in audit mode, if a malicious file is run, you can block it, but it will eventually get detected once it is known to be a virus. So when a file first runs, we may not know, we'll know that it's unknown, but we won't know if it's a threat or not. So we'll only block it once we know that it's a threat. Generally speaking, for audit mode, you won't spend a lot of time running the product in audit mode. It's usually only used during trial installations. So when we first deploy the product to your network, audit mode gives us an opportunity just to catch up with the files that are actually running on your network. But after that, clients tend to run in either hardening or lock mode. So that tends to not be an issue. Great stuff. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yes, based on your what you explore in the in your workshop, that the the advanced reporting tool, this is the only tool that we can use to making the tracing for the any attacks happened on the PCs or workstations. Is there any limitation for the APT tool? And if no one subscribe on this feature, they will can't looking for the tracing the attacks, and how we can how Panda help them for doing this.
Great. So that is actually a very good question, because what the question is asking is effectively, what capability would you lose without the advanced reporting tool? And the short answer is actually none. From a protection perspective, the protection of the endpoint, dealing with any class of threat, that is handled by Adaptive Defense 360. So at no stage should you need to go into the telemetry in order to analyze threats and their behavior and the events associated with that. We do log it there, so it is accessible. So if you have a threat that's running, the data will be in the advanced reporting tool, but the data will also be in the Adaptive Defense console if you want to see what actions that specific threat took. The advanced reporting tool, that telemetry, like I said earlier, you can ingest that into other SIEM platforms. You just order a slightly different module. But the idea with that telemetry is that it actually gives you access to all of the events generated on the machine. So not just the malware events, but also regular use cases. So if somebody runs an application, like they open Outlook, then that event is logged in the advanced reporting tool. And you can then use that telemetry to do things like end user behavioral analysis. You can use that to do like insider threat detection if you're looking for, people accessing sensitive documents, that kind of thing. So there are lots of other applications to the data in the advanced reporting tool. So in short, you shouldn't need to research threats, but it is possible if you really wanted to do so. But the use case for ART would generally fall outside of that. Okay, I see there is another question here. Can you elaborate on protection from ransomware attacks? So that's a question that we get quite frequently. And ransomware is a ever-present problem and is going to be an issue so long as we have cryptocurrencies that can be used to anonymously pay. Now, we can protect users from ransomware, and we do so very effectively with our zero trust model. So that model, what that allows us to do is implement a policy to lock down the workstation. And what that policy does is it'll only allow known safe processes to run on the machine. So even if a attacker generates a brand new, never seen before ransomware variant, your users can try run that variant as much as possible. They can double click on the file can run in the background. The file will never be able to execute until it has been classified by Panda Labs. And it's at that point that we will actually pick it up as malware and remove it from the machine before the user has opportunity to run it. So how do we protect against ransomware? Well, we protect against ransomware by preventing you from running ransomware in the first place. To our mind, just FYI, that is slightly different to how other vendors will do that. So some vendors will use monitoring, looking for encryption behavior and access to multiple consecutive files, behavioral based stuff to detect ransomware. And we choose not to do that because the behavioral based detections require that you actually allow the threat to execute in your environment in the hopes that your protection product will detect it. We don't do that. It's much more reliable by having us check the threat first before the threat is allowed to run in your environment. And that's the model that we subscribe to. So I hope that that answers your question. All right, there's another question here around monitors in your company. If they're not connected to your network, is there a way to secure it and have it appear in your asset management system? Not really. So we don't have any direct integration with third-party asset management products. That said, the product and all the data and telemetry that we gather is independent of the network. So it doesn't really matter on which network your endpoints reside. In fact, with many of our customers, we have distributed networks of people working from home or lots of different offices all over the country. So from a management perspective, we can manage the endpoints very effectively from there. As Jeremy did indicate in his presentation, we do have another product called Panda Systems Management, which is effectively our own asset management solution. And that provides access to your inventory and reporting for asset management purposes. It gives you access to remote desktop tools if you want to do remote support for users. It actually also has a patch management module, as well as a software deployment module and a scripting and monitoring engine, which are quite effective. So we do actually have our own asset management system that works very nicely with the Panda protection products. Cool, so hope that answers that. Any other questions there?
Okay, thank you, Matthew, for your great demo and responding all the questions. أحب أشكركم جميعا، أتمنى يعني إن إحنا نكون أفدناكم النهارده، وإن شاء الله بقى نشوفكم في الإيفنتس اللي جاية. أنا بس يعني عايز أسيب لكم السوشيال ميديا تشانلز بتاعتنا والكونتاكت بتاعتي، عشان لو في أي حد محتاج يعني سؤال، محتاج أي سبورت في أي حاجة، يعني ما يترددش إن هو يكلمني على طول.
هل ممكن البرزنتيشن
كده بقى واضحة؟ يا ريت ناخد كده كابتشر وندخل بقى نعمل فولو على السوشيال ميديا تشانل علشان نبقى اب تو ديت باي حاجه احنا بننزلها على البيجز وعن البرودكتس فول بورتفوليو. Thanks to all attendees. Thanks for your patience and your interaction. Special thanks to all Panda Africa team for your cooperation.
Please, there's a question from Mr. Khalid Abdullah.
ممكن نشير البرزنتيشن احنا شفناها دلوقتي.
برزنتيشن انهي؟
برزنتيشن احنا كنا بنتفرج عليها دلوقتي. اوكي
تمام.
حضرتك تقصد السلايد يبقى واضح شيرنج، ولا تقصد البرزنتيشن اللي اتكلمنا منها عايز منها نسخه؟
البرزنتيشن احنا كنا بنتكلم عنها، ممكن تكون شير للناس كلها.
طيب تمام، هنتواصل مع حضرتك بعد الايفنت ونشوف الموضوع معاك. حاضر.
اشكركم كلكم.
شكرا ليك.
شكرا جزيلا. شكرا جزيلا. ولو في اي حد محتاج اي حاجه احنا جاهزين يعني عليه اتصال، او ممكن تبعت لنا على الايميل بتاعنا. شكرا لكم. باي باي.